So this is my second stream of the day, and I want to try something different. I want to come into this completely unprepared, except for the intention to as much as is possible, honestly get to what I care about and why I'm doing what I'm doing now. I have such a strong tendency to package and to turn raw intention into story, into a Medium post, into a tweet, into a live stream, and that'll happen. But I just want to name that and then try my best to stay close to what's real. And then, of course, this is also an ongoing project in exploring these new workflows that are possible. And so I'm excited to play back this audio, listen to it, transcribe it, see what AI and automation has to do uh, to help me with this, run it through some stuff multiple times. We'll see, or just leave it. So when I co-founded Hello World in 2019, I didn't really anticipate the extent to which my work would become about helping people do good in the world, and how much my own path was also um, figuring out how to do good in the world. So 5 years earlier, in 2016, I joined Khan Academy, not completely from a sense of wanting to do good in the world, but feeling somehow called to a different mode of working than I had done in the past. Sort of specifically, let's start a business that does something interesting, does something cool. This was more about playing a role in an ongoing area in education and learning, and saying, well, I don't know exactly what the outcomes will be, but I want to be in this space. I want to put some time in here. And so it was just a different approach. And so Khan Academy, after that, start Hello World, and now we're looking to spot and develop and reward talent among young people trying to do good in the world. People who maybe don't excel on grades or test scores, maybe aren't being picked up and um, sort of gathered into a system of support um, for raw intellect or STEM or whatever, but they might have those things, but more centrally, they're uploading videos of like decontaminating their local lake or doing sand art to heal the trauma in their community, or making a COVID tracker based on seismic activity. Whatever it is, they're steeped in and sparked by some calling to do good. And this work was very dangerous for me because it intersected with an allergy I have around teenagers trying to make a good college portfolio. And I mean, I'm all for that. I don't have any problems with people telling a great story and all that stuff. But it is bullshit. It is playing the game. And so this was very difficult, very delicate work because we didn't necessarily want people not to play the game or to discourage people from playing the game. And at the same time, we were trying to do something different with these stories of community impact. They weren't just sort of a rider on college admissions. They actually meant to be front and center. They were meant to more be like the kind of artifact that if you're a venture capitalist and you're trying to figure out what founder should I invest in, you're very actively trying not to get fooled by the bullshit. And so a founder might be really charismatic. And if you're a VC, you're sort of saying like, well, great charisma. We love that. Charisma will get you a long way. But what about X, Y, Z? Likewise, when we would see a great story on Hello World, great charisma, great storytelling, great video editing, and how deep is their research? How authentic are they? Are they likely to stick with this for a while? How are they showing up in the community? Anyway, that work was hard to like to know how to navigate that and to be in service of the kid because I don't know and I still don't know what's best for a poor teenager in rural India who just wants to study in the US and has like a pretty great community impact story. Um, what's right for them? It doesn't feel like my place to say it and to sort of say like you should do this community project for the rest of your life. You should be in social good. That felt like a step too far to champion. Um, so I tried to always stay close to the quality of the work, the authenticity of the work, and the opportunity to connect people with those in the same space, whether they're peers or near peers or mentors or opportunities or fellowships, um, to sort of expand the possibility space for these people. I think that toward the later part of Hello World became really clear to me that all I wanted to do was help people see and expand their possibilities and then make the right choice for them. This idea of possibility space and moving through one's aspirations rapidly by making the unknown known continues to speak to me. And parallel with all that work was the question of like, well, how am I evaluating my own contribution? I mean, here I am, I'm building out this tech platform. We've got partners. Does this work matter? Am I coming alive in this work? Am I uniquely additive? What is my value over a replacement person? If I hired someone to replace me, what would be lost, if anything? And if nothing, then what is the space that I should be working in such that that cost of replacing me would be very high? And at the same time, what does society need? And do I care what society needs? Like, do I really actually care? Or do I have a slightly different energy? And it's that question that I started to dig into more recently. So let's talk about X risk, which is the name for the set of existential risks to humanity. An incomplete list would include nuclear holocaust, some sort of bio warfare, kind of like nanobots, kind of like Cat's Cradle type Ice 9 event, AI alignment catastrophes, right? Situations in which the whole human project would be lost and wiped out. And it wouldn't be the first time that that's happened. And I started looking at these, and the only one that felt remotely feasible for me to be involved in was AI risk. Because some of these existential risks, I think an appropriate response can be and is like cross your fingers and hope it doesn't happen, right? Like if we discover that an asteroid is hurtling toward Earth, and there's a film I haven't seen, but I'm interested in seeing in part because one of my favorite thinkers, Tim Morton, is sort of tangentially involved in that project. Don't Look Up. So maybe this film would change my thinking here, but my initial thinking is if there's a big asteroid hurtling toward Earth, it's a big problem. There's a set of people who are hopefully well equipped to handle it, and I'm just gonna get my affairs in order and do a lot of breathing exercises to try to get through this with my family. Maybe take up art. And I mean, sure, if there's a product manager role for the UX team on the asteroid destroying initiative, maybe I'll apply. But again, that I might not be, I might actually be lower value than just some ex Facebook employee there, right? And if you're a Facebook employee and you're watching this, what I mean to say is like someone who knows how to live happily as kind of a cog in a larger system and not feel deeply restless in that environment. Whereas AI risk felt a little bit different, felt more alive. And it turned out that even though I didn't know really anything about the fundamentals of neural networks, language models, etc., I'm somehow steeped in this. Hmm. What do I bring into it? Bring into it my undergraduate education in linguistics, formal language and mind, cog sci, steeped in philosophy, particularly Wittgenstein and Heidegger, meditation practice, and a connection with something that felt like AI doesn't have a way to address. Pretty familiar with and interested in culture and how automation is sort of already ruining everything it touches. Basketball is less watchable because of the way that advanced statistics have sort of dissected it into points and wins. And so now teams don't really play defense and they shoot 3 pointers. And that'll change. Maybe more concerning film and the movies that just aren't getting made anymore. So all that came into play. And yet, like, that's not a job. What is the job there? That's like public intellectual, and we have lots of those. I think I would love to be a public intellectual. I don't know if I have the intelligence, stamina, work ethic, influence to participate. But I got interested in public intellectuals. One of the public intellectuals who I got most interested in during this phase is Daniel Schmachtenberger. Daniel Schmachtenberger is, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, who took a really interesting approach to X risk and makes the case that all of these X risks are underpinned by one problem, or maybe a small class of problems that are really structural in nature and solvable if one brings kind of a set of policy and economic theory and game mechanics into play. He has more to say about this than I'll say here, and it includes sort of the tragedy that commons, but is more than the tragedy that commons. Um, so that's kind of interesting. Maybe there's a role to play in policy somehow for me, or a way to contribute to that conversation. And as I researched more about Daniel Schmachtenberger, I kind of encountered a nascent movement around the meaning crisis that feels more or less right, although sometimes the way it's described doesn't resonate with me. There's something like close but not quite there yet around the meaning crisis, but certainly there's energy. And since discovering this scene, I've had the opportunity to participate in a few different workshops, watch lots of videos. Um, and right now, one of the scenes that I'm most interested in is this collaboration between John Vervaeke and Guy Sengstock. And that's interesting there. But I'm trying to make a living. I'm not trying to just watch YouTube videos and chime in on Discord. And one thing that I'm starting to realize about what I care about is I don't worry. So I've my iPad is downloading the new iOS version. So I thought maybe I would draw, but let's see if it's where we're at. It's still preparing the update. But I realized, like, with these stories of catastrophe, what's really interesting about them is they trigger something different for each individual. It seems like we all have a core annihilation fantasy or annihilation fear, but the exact nature of that annihilation, like what are we afraid of, really runs the gamut. And so maybe like the Deutschian, at some point I had a 2x2. Let's see if I can reconstruct the 2x2 thinking through it. So in one quadrant, there's what I would call the Deutschian. That's like after David Deutsch annihilation fantasy, which is, it's funny that I call it a fantasy. I mean, I think it's a nightmare. but it's very alive to these people. This is like, it would be horrible if it's the sort of thing that one might ruminate over, lose sleep over, be possessed by. The Deutschian annihilation fantasy is the end of human knowledge. So there have been times in history where we strike onto a methodology, a way of knowing, a way of learning that is incredibly fertile and constructive and productive, and has been cut short in the past, and we're currently in the middle of the longest known run. It's not quite the scientific method for Deutsch. It's more about fallibilism, good explanations and part of what makes an explanation good is it can be refuted and replaced by a better explanation. And so for Deutsch, there will always be problems, but all problems are solvable. It's this incredibly optimistic, positive lens. And so our job is just not to let the fire go out. The odd parts about a Deutschian model are a few. One is it's not particularly interested in Homo sapiens. It's interested in knowledge creators. And so if there's another entity that can create knowledge that humans can, great, the fire continues. And it's also not, I don't think, particularly interested in population size. So whether the global population is 8 billion or 8 million, as long as there's knowledge creation happening, we're good. Of course, when there's 8 billion people, there's a lot more knowledge creators. But if there were 8 million people and they were just sort of the best and brightest, that would probably be fine, maybe better. So that's the Deutschian quadrant. And I find that quadrant just like disgusting. But perhaps maybe even more disgusting is the utopia quadrant, the network state quadrant, the through Web3 maybe we can find sort of a better society. So where Deutsch, now I'm summoning to my quadrants. Deutsch is somehow more internal, right, around knowledge creation. This now we're going social. Society creation, knowledge creation and society creation. So if you're like an A16Z team member, you may belong in this quadrant. Maybe this is like Hegel might go here. I don't know enough about, the telos, but like we can keep improving society. And what if we could create societies sort of like we can create like hypotheses and experiments, like let the best societies flourish. So that's got a little bit of a manifest destiny feel. That's got a little bit let's colonize Mars feel. Fuck this shit, right? I mean, it's not efficient or really workable to try to like heal this society. But it's incredibly optimistic. So these two, the Deutschian and the A16Z, they're both really optimistic. They're both like move fast and break things. They're, I think they're laser sharp. They're very smart. They might be right in some important sense, but they're also pretty heartless. They're maybe like not really keen on looking at what is. Now we can go pessimistic, and again we'll talk about world, outer and inner. So the pessimistic outer, the conservative outer, maybe instead of the progressive outer. The conservative outer is like the UN sustainability development goals. Is Greta Thunberg. This is our planet. These are our people. Can't we find a way where people live with dignity and minimize human suffering? This quadrant seems to lack some of the rigorous thinking that I see in other quadrants. There's like an innocence sometimes that comes through. And it's also the quadrant that I think probably is the most socially endorsed. So you sort of, it's like, I think there are a lot of people doing really important, good work in this quadrant, but for every one of them, there's like 100 people who are just sort of like regurgitating social messaging. And I don't know how this quadrant answers questions around like AI risk, right? Or what Taleb would maybe call like black swan events. Like, and this is highly schematized. So what I'm doing is unreasonably dividing and conquering people into quadrants, and that's not true, right? Like take effective altruism. Effective altruism regularly moved between the UN SDG quadrant and the Deutschian we must preserve knowledge creation quadrant. EA is simultaneously really interested in AI risk from like a how do we make sure that um, we don't get wiped out as sort of a knowledge creating species, as well as malaria nets or whatever. In fact, I think for any ideology to be at all compelling, it has to somehow traverse these quadrants. I think. But I'm saving the last quadrant for a reason because I think this is the one that I feel most aligned with. And so let's reason out loud whether like I want to live in that quadrant or there's just something about that lens that appeals to me, and then maybe I can get rid of this whole 2 by 2 completely. The inner pessimistic is like we have something special inside of us that is not knowledge creation. It's not about all the problems we can solve. It's like way more basic and static, simple somehow. It's way more intimate. has something to do with like falling in love or making art or just having a spiritual experience or going into nature or having a good conversation. It's like relational. And in some ways, it's just about awakening that every person has within them already this incredible resource that we have really mixed results in accessing. And we don't really know how to connect with our source, or we've forgotten how. And we're at risk of permanently losing that connection as a society. Because there are technologies that existed in time, like there's some Greek ship weaponry. They would like set other boats on fire. And it exists orally, but nobody knows how to do that anymore. Now we have cooler weapons now, so it doesn't really matter to us. But I don't want to get too woo with this because like I want this to mean more to you than just shamanic sorcery cults doing magic and we don't know how to do that anymore. Like that is part of it. That is what I'm talking about with this quadrant. Like falling in love, like getting divine inspiration. Different than knowledge creation. This isn't about, do you see the difference? Knowledge creation is like, so long as there's one copy of Popper's book on Mars and one person to read it, I think the Deutschian fire carries on. This is something you can't read in a book. This has to be transmitted relationally. This is like more like lineages. We can be ambivalent about lineages, but this is a live transmission. I am going to try to roll these quadrants up quickly, and then let's get rid of them, please. This is a place I get trapped in, systemizing, like Schmachtenberger, like a lot of men, and some women too, I'm sure. But I say men because there's a big movement of men making maps, the map making men. And that project is so doomed from the start, I think. So let's finish the map and throw it away. Inner and outer, progressive and conservative, progressive and inner. Knowledge creation must continue in some form. Could be robots on Pluto. It's fine. Maybe better. Society creation could be A16Z in, you know, on an ocean liner in international waters. Great. Document it, and then let's have some revolutions in other societies. Outer and conservative. This is our planet. Let's care for each other. If we can't do that, then why would we think that we have a shot on Mars? That's disgusting. There's like a revulsion. And inner awakening, independent of kind of external circumstances, is the most important project and is at risk of getting lost. I think the bottom quadrant, the pessimists, the conservatives, feel repulsed by the optimists. And I think the optimists probably feel condescension for the conservatives. All of this thinking led me to just the conclusion that I don't care about society. Like, the outer world doesn't make me come alive. Like, of course, I'm going to donate and vote and whatever. But, like, at the end of the day, as horrible as like one of these massive catastrophes will be, like, it'll suck. Presumably, I'll be annihilated in it, and my last moments will be unspeakable anguish, and I might watch my most cherished loved ones perish right before I do, or it could be long, like long and drawn out suffering, radioactive poisoning. I mean, first, what comes up is my own dread of my own suffering, and also the suffering of people I love. But like near the bottom of what comes up is like, we can't let this happen for society. Like, society must go on. There's something in me that feels more called to the inner world. A little bit to the Deutschian stuff too, even though I called it disgusting. Like, a little bit like, what a waste. We could have what we could have done. The reason this insight is so helpful is because it makes me appreciate that AI risk is not something that I'm afraid of happening in the future. I'm not afraid of a future catastrophe. I'm afraid of the catastrophe that's already happening and may already be underway at such a clip that our fate is sealed. Hubert Dreyfus is the prophet here, and I started reading him well, I started experiencing him through his lectures on Heidegger. Maybe 2 years ago I started. I should probably download those. It's interesting. There's this incredible Yoga Nidra 30-minute meditation by a Swami whose name I can't remember. And it was one of my go-to YouTube videos. And I checked it this morning and it's gone. It's been like wiped out of YouTube. And I never recorded it. I would be sad if that happens to more of the content that I love. So I first encountered Dreyfus through Heidegger, and then he, through his books, What Computers Can't Do, and years later, What Computers Still Can't Do, describes, I think, pretty succinctly the the entryway to the fear I have. But the fear I have is even more targeted than Dreyfus. Dreyfus says, look, for 2,000 years ish, the West has been on a project to do two things. One is to say the essence of being human is being rational. You know, what sets us apart from everybody else is something in here, in our minds. And two, that something can be expressed. And when you put those two together, that we're essentially mechanical. We are wonderful, magical machines, but we are machines. We represent the world in kind of a programmatic way, and then do wonderful transformations and calculations on that data. It's a read-write API, so we can kind of write back into the world, and that creates these incredible feedback loops. But we are like supercomputers, and for thousands of years, that was just sort of like an attitude, and only now we are on the verge of having to reject or accept that thesis, because we finally have come up with computers that are super powerful to the point where you can kind of squint at them and be like, that's like our cousin. And maybe in a few more years, that's our brother. And in a few more years, maybe that's our parent in terms of sort of intellectual horsepower. And the fascinating thing is like not whether that case is true or not. It's so uh, obviously false to me. But its falseness or its truth value is not relevant. Because as Dreyfus says, well, paraphrasing Dreyfus, and I don't want to reduce this to make it kind of dead even to me, but we are fucking really malleable. And I'd put out the claim that we're more malleable than we are rational. Like we could totally be a society right now doing all sorts of dancing and magic and communing in a pretty different way. That seems possible, and I don't think we'd be any less human. We'd be different. We'd be a different kind of society, and like that's possible. Maybe we'll get blown up, and the survivors will do exactly that. And for a lot of the quadrants, that's a disaster. Not so for my quadrant. The risk is not whether AI will become rational in the way humans are rational. It's that we will buy that story and manifest that story. And if we do that, we will actually kill or lose a big part of our malleability or a big part of our aliveness. And we won't really know that we lost it because we're shapeshifters. We're malleable. We can move around. And I mean, look how fast we changed with Google. How to difference between impact driver and drill. That was something that I Googled the other day. I don't need to Google in complete sentences. Like I know how Google thinks, and so I morphed to commune with Google better. So I think we completely can expect in the very near future a massive social morphing to conform to and conform with the inner workings of machines, which are mechanical. And I'm very skeptical at the moment that there's any way out of that. That, like, even this is something that I'd like to do more rigorously at some point, but let's take the stance. Sure, that is, if we let that happen, that would be awful. But we can use AI to free ourselves up for other things. Isn't that what we want to do? Think about all the repetitive stuff that we do right now. Like, if we can just harness AI to do that, and then we'll be freed up. It doesn't seem like that's how it goes. I don't know whether it can't go that way, but we do seem to be missing something. And I wish I could come up in this moment. This is another systematizing moment, but we can probably think of all sorts of examples where the person says, like, it's just a tool that I will use, and then they end up being used by the tool. So heroin is an easy example, and one falls into addiction, and one needs more and more of it, presumably to feel the same highs, and then one gets consumed by it. My old therapist gave me an example that was interesting, which is the fork. So people used to eat with their hands, and in a lot of cultures they still do. And then we invented the fork, and it makes it so much easier to shovel food into your mouth. But there are societies today where I'm imagining, like, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Northern Africa. I think that's a culture where a lot of people eat with their hands. I think Sri Lanka maybe is where he had done field work. Where I have, okay, a warning. This is sort of like anecdotal and casual and sloppy, and so I appreciate that I'm, like, summoning some culture into our minds to make a point. So acknowledged. They didn't want to use forks. They're like, the food tastes better when I can have it in my hands. But we would never go back to using our hands to eat now. It's not efficient, and it's not socially accepted. And your clothes are going to get dirty. And there are probably other examples and other classes of this problem where we think we'll use a tool and the tool uses us. And it's probably interesting and worthwhile to know and name those different ways, because it's happening to us now. And again, like, the fork is an example. AI and automation is in some ways really new, but in other ways is a continuation of a long line of technological innovation that intermediates experience, distances us from experience. But because of the rate at which it's unfolding and its power to disrupt everything, it is not merely the straw that broke the camel's back. It's like the straw making machine that is on the camel's back. So I think my project is now to participate in some kind of movement of preservation and reminding, to myself first and foremost, to my immediate friends and family next, and then ideally in some work context, like, oh, there's this other way of relating, this non-mechanical way of relating, and there's some really profound human intelligence, human wisdom that we don't want to lose, and we will lose. I see that as likely. We might lose it in really nefarious ways, like I don't know whether it's Ken Wilber or someone else, but someone made the point, like enlightenment over the years didn't mean one thing. Like there were people who would have big openings and then continue to own slaves. They didn't like they didn't wake up and be like, "Oh my gosh, like I shouldn't have a slave anymore." Because socially they had a frame that wasn't really challenged. So in 10 years, when things look pretty different and maybe psilocybin is really widespread, people are microdosing and going on meaningful, sanctioned retreats authorized by and shepherded by medical professionals who have training in this. That doesn't give me any comfort somehow. And maybe I need to look into that more. I'm somehow deeply conflicted about the mass normalization of drug use, even though I personally have benefited from it, because there's some whiff of the mechanical there, some whiff of these awakenings happening inside of a mechanical milieu. Um, and some feeling, some dread of like a door could be closed, the opposite of Pandora's box. What is the opposite of Pandora's box? A door that closes and will never be reopened. And once it closes, nothing will ever come out. That's always been present for me. And you read like is it Baudrillard, the simulations and simulacra? Some thinkers bring that to life really powerfully, and I've never quite been able to grasp it. Janes is another person. Just thinking about all of the ritual and all of the magic and all of the connection, all the ways of being that used to be normal that were lost because you can't write them down in a book. It's a different kind of knowing. And so it seems like desperately important to participate in the arms race in some sense and try to transmit those ways of being to as many people as possible. And I'm in an interesting kind of alive place because I feel at once like I'm starting to be in a position where I can transmit something, but also in desperate need of transmission. But there's no conflict there. There's just that wish of being in a chain. And as a parent, that's another, maybe everything that I'm just describing is just a map making man's way of contending with fatherhood. What do I want to transmit to my kid? Maybe this is what that's about. So what am I doing now? I'm participating in and gathering and collecting those examples where you kind of just you can watch it on YouTube. Go to the Gloria films, which one of my coaches um, turned me on to. The Gloria films are from like the 60s, and a woman, Gloria, agreed to be recorded as she did therapy with three different therapists, three different approaches. and you can go watch that, and something very special is happening. Therapy, talk therapy. Here's a hot take that I've had kind of sitting in the hopper. Talk therapy is actually one of the few places where this is still alive, and that's why we're destroying it. And we're destroying it by pretending that it's not powerful, or that it's like maybe uses power. It's either doesn't work, right? It's not efficient. Talk therapy, do that for 5 years, you're not going anywhere. One MDMA session and some CBT, and you're going to get those benefits. Or talk therapy is inherently wrong because there's a power dynamic there, the therapist and the patient. And wouldn't it be better if we're all just friends? And like, I'm not there's truth to both of those claims, but I do think that there's a larger project underway to destroy that technology precisely because it is one of the vestigial organs of, and I think this is true. I think you can go back and trace like from psychotherapy to hypnosis, and from hypnosis to like magic and sorcery. So I think the lineage is actually real there. But I'm collecting, you go watch the Gloria films and watch how Gloria interacts with Carl Rogers. It's like, whoa, how would you possibly describe that in a programmatic way? But it's also not animals. Well, maybe it's animals. Maybe it's a very complex dance between animals. That's interesting. But it's so much richer that you have to sort of celebrate it as something more alive. And that's why the Guy Sengstock Vervaeke stuff is also interesting, because they're doing work that in some ways is like that therapy opening what's in the room, what's in the space work, but they're doing it with a regard toward kind of intellectual work. Philosophy stuff. And then just more ordinary things of like times that you've been in a room with someone you really admire and the way you just like completely open up to them. I call this devotional learning. Like you receive. And just ordinary. Like maybe you've had that with one of your parents in a conversation, or with a mentor at work, with your boss, if you really loved your boss and they sat you down and said like, this is what I want to tell you. This is my advice for you. This is what I see in you. So these moments aren't they don't have to be peak experiences. But it's not hard for me to see the end of all of that, kind of a structural death to connection. And I feel committed to and invested in fighting that death somehow. Um, and a kind of reverberation between my own personal work and something social. If you watch this whole thing, amazing. This is not. This is raw, and so if you chime in, you're part of the generative stage of this, and